All right, so this is the drip irrigation fundamentals class. Really looking forward to it. Nice audience from all over the state this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And we are going to spend the next 75 minutes together talking about drip irrigation and then also programming an irrigation controller. So a little bonus section this evening. I want to start by inviting Victoria from California American Water to say hi, or Wendy too. And thank you very much for hosting this evening's workshop.
Yeah, thank you, Pamela. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I know we have a great class on the fundamentals of drip irrigation, so I hope you all learn a lot. I am Victoria. I am the Northern Water Conservation Specialist for California American Water. It's a tongue twister. And then I am also joined here by Wendy, and she handles the Southern California Water Conservation. So thank you all so much.
And people can ask you questions also through the Q&A. So that is the way to go. All right.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, as I mentioned, you are going to get a link that is going to come from you through an email that is coming from Zoom. And that Zoom email is going to go to the email that you use to register for the workshop. And so check your spam or, junk box or whatever, because sometimes that happens to Zoom emails. But the email will have a link to this book, which it's a PDF, and the book has a huge amount of information, some of which we're covering tonight, but even more information about how to transform your landscape from grass to garden, and a lot of beautiful images of achievable landscapes. All right, tonight's workshop is organized into these 6 topics. We're going to start with talking about the basics, so we just are all sort of on the same page, basics of irrigation and landscaping. We'll talk a little bit about proper design and things you have to think about when you are installing drip irrigation, and then we'll go into the actual installation process. When is a good time to do it, when isn't. We will also talk about converting from spray irrigation to drip irrigation, which is something I'm sure many of you have thought about if you haven't already tried. And we will also talk about then programming our irrigation controller or irrigation timer. And what are some of the things that we need to know about our landscape? How do we actually maybe set the controller? So that's about a 15-minute session and a really great addition to this irrigation class. And then finally, we'll go through some critical maintenance issues. Okay, here we go, starting with the basics. Now, I want you to remember or know, if this is your first class, that everything G3 talks about when it comes to landscaping comes back to this concept of the watershed approach to landscaping. And essentially, this is a way of evaluating a property as though it is a mini watershed. And what we're doing is we're looking at the property and we're trying to figure out, well, where does water first fall on our property? For most of us, that's the roof. And then where does it actually run off our property? That's often a driveway or a walkway. And we want to come up with strategies to manage everything in between those 2 points, that we can maximize the performance of the landscape between the place where water lands and the place where water leaves. And in order to really kind of take control of our own mini watershed, we are recommending 4 key principles. So there are really 4 things that we can do in every single landscape to completely change it and turn it into something that is functioning as a highly efficient landscape and that is resilient in the face of climate change. And those 4 things are shown at the bottom of the screen. We're going to start by building healthy living soil. We'll actually talk a little bit about that tonight. Healthy living soil is the foundation for everything that we talk about in landscaping. Most important concept. Number 2, we capture rainwater and we hold it on the property, use it as a resource. We don't let it run off the property. Number 3, we select local climate appropriate plants. And so these are mostly local native plants as much as possible, but really climate appropriate plants are the most important thing here. And then the topic for tonight is using highly efficient supplemental irrigation. And what that means is if we need to use irrigation, we're going to make sure that that irrigation was properly manufactured, that the system was designed, installed, and is being maintained properly. And then also that we are using our irrigation controller properly to make sure that we're watering, when plants actually need it and not just because it's a Tuesday. So this is the difference between having an irrigation system that is, it's there, it's doing a job of putting water on a landscape, and an irrigation system that is actually efficient, is saving water, and is enhancing our landscape instead of degrading it, because it's very easy to apply too much irrigation. So those are the four things that comprise a healthy watershed approach landscape, and we're going to focus on irrigation tonight. Because even when we do everything right with our uh, landscape design and installation, and we plant plants, at the right time of year to take advantage of the um, winter rains, um, it is sometimes that those gardens are going to need supplemental water. And even when we hold on to rainwater, even if we use gray water, they may need supplemental potable water. Potable water is drinking water. And this is a good use of this is a good use of potable water. Landscaping when it's done right, plants, making sure that plants get the right amount of water is a great use of potable water, but it needs to be the right amount. And there are some plants, even if they're California natives, that are going to need a little supplemental water in the summertime. And then also, our climate has really been changing. We've been having winters that have longer dry periods and sometimes super dry periods in which though the plants that are adapted to our climate, they are usually getting their water at that time. And so when they get to the summer, they're really struggling because they didn't get the natural rain from the sky during the winter time. So in those conditions, we definitely have to irrigate. The weird thing is we're not going to be irrigating in the summer. We're going to be irrigating in the winter time. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but I think it's important for us to realize that even though we try to get rid of irrigation, there are some times in some gardens that we are going to need this additional water, and having an efficient irrigation system is the way to do it. And the question really is, are we going to use drip irrigation or are we going to use spray? So this workshop is primarily about drip irrigation, and there are a lot of reasons why we prefer drip over spray in most situations. First of all, it's important to remember that there is a difference. Spray irrigation, which you see on the right-hand side, emits water in gallons per minute. So when you see a spray irrigation run time, it's usually very short, just a few minutes, because it's putting out a lot of water during that period of time. Whereas drip irrigation is emitting water in gallons per hour. And that's why when you see an irrigation system that's drip, the timer uh, runtime, it's going to be a lot longer than what you would have had with the spray. The thing about drip irrigation is it's delivering water right at the roots of the plants. It's not just spraying it willy-nilly. So as a result, you get less evaporation. You actually get fewer weeds because the water is a lot more targeted toward the plants that you are trying to enhance. Uh, it is applying the water slow enough in most cases that the soil can actually absorb that water. And as a result, we get less runoff, which means the water is being more beneficially applied to the landscape. Now, spray irrigation has its good points when it's highly efficient and it's well designed and installed and so forth. For very large areas, for some hillside situations, this is a good solution. But for the most part, especially if we're doing a grass transformation, we're removing grass and replacing it with garden, drip irrigation is going to be the way to go. And just so you can wrap your head around it, if we ran an irrigation system, two irrigation systems for an hour, and the drip irrigation system would only be putting out 1 gallon of water in that hour. Each emitter would only be putting out 1 gallon of water. Whereas that spray system would be putting out 60 gallons of water in that hour, each one of those emitters. So you can see there's a big difference in these two things. And I'm just going to preview and say this is why we never mix spray and drip on the same irrigation line, because it just doesn't make any sense. They're completely different creatures. Now, the purpose of irrigation is really to maintain a balance of oxygen and water in the soil at any given time. What we want to try to do is have enough water in the soil so that all the microorganisms can swim around and the plant roots can access that water. But we also want to have enough oxygen in the soil so that all the same organisms are able to breathe. Most of them breathe oxygen. Most of microorganisms breathe oxygen, and actually plant roots need some of that too. So we're trying to maintain this like kind of just right balance of oxygen and water. When we get to a situation where we have applied too much water to the soil and we've gotten rid of all the oxygen, we end up in a soil condition that is too saturated. And that's exactly the time that pathogenic microbes breed. So in other words, the diseases breed when the water is way too saturated, over irrigated. On the other hand, we could get into a situation where there isn't sufficient water in the soil. The microorganisms can't swim around, they go to sleep, and the soil has water in it, but it's too tightly bound up with those particles of soil, and so the plant roots can't actually extract it. And that's very dangerous for a plant too. The plant will have a lot of oxygen but no water, and the plant will be very unhappy and will, start to wilt. The thing that's interesting, I just want to mention, is that if the water is too if the water is too great and the soil is saturated, and there or the situation is it's too dry above ground, the plant looks almost exactly the same. The plant will wilt, will look terrible, and it's very difficult to determine which one is the condition, but they're both bad. And we'll talk about how you figure out which is the right thing, but we're going for the middle. And this depends. The actual amount of water in your soil at any given time depends on the type of soil that you have. So we recommend that you use the soil hand test or a jar test to determine the amount or the type of soil that you have. And the book that we are going to be sending you has that test in it. So you can do that, just what these people are doing here, and figure out what type of soil you have. The reason you want to know about the type of soil is because not only do different soil types hold on to different amounts of water, but water moves differently through soil types. When you have sandy soil, the water goes in very, very quickly. It actually can go in so quickly that it can bypass the roots of the plant and go down below the roots of the plant. And when you have a clay situation, you kind of have an opposite thing happen. The water goes in very, very slowly. In fact, if it isn't slowed down enough, it will run off the surface. And the water that does go into the soil actually doesn't move so much down as it does sideways. So it kind of spreads out at a very shallow layer instead of going down to the depths of the roots. Both of these conditions can be mitigated by running your irrigation controller in different ways, but it's important to remember that if you have sandy soils, you could apply a lot of water and it might not actually get there. And the same thing with clay. You could be applying a lot of water and most of it doesn't get to the roots of your plant. So we need to kind of know what kind of soil we have so we can adjust our irrigation expectations. The other thing to know about is something called evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration is the process that the plants use to take water out of the soil. So evapotranspiration is called ET, and transpiration is essentially the process by which the plants remove the water from the soil and they put it up into their leaves and out into the atmosphere as water vapor. Basically plants use soil water to cool themselves off because, remember, they're doing things like photosynthesis and using the sun for that. It's very hot work. And so as a result, they have to cool their leaves off, and they do that by taking the water out of the soil and pushing it out through their leaves into the atmosphere. So that process is called evapotranspiration. It happens every time the sun is out. And it's kind of like reverse rain. That's one way to think about it. And it's always expressed as inches of water over a period of time. So we like to think about evapotranspiration as the way that plants remove water from the soil, and it's happening every single day. A little bit, few inches or a little bit is coming out. Now, how quickly the plants remove water from the soil will actually affect our irrigation schedule. If we have a plant that requires a lot of water and removes it quickly from the soil, this is going to be a plant that we are going to be irrigating very frequently and pretty much throughout the year. But when we have plants that are maybe adapted to our climate or better adapted to our climate, we will find that they're removing water from the soil a lot slower, and they don't actually need as much when they do remove it. And so as a result, it could be months in between irrigation events. And so this, what you're seeing here is a chart that is comparing cool season grass, which is our typical lawn, on the left-hand side, and it's showing you that it needs more than 50 inches of water a year to be happy and healthy. And it takes that water out really fast, which is why we have to constantly be putting more water on on grass, um, throughout the year. Whereas plants that are adapted, that are low water requiring plants or very low water requiring plants, are actually only requiring the amount of water that we get as like average rainfall or less. And so for those, we could be irrigating, every couple of weeks, or as I said, even every couple of months with very low water requiring plants. So how these plants evapotranspire makes a difference in how frequently we have to irrigate them and how much we have to irrigate them when we do. Okay, so those are some basic concepts just to get you kind of organized in your mind about how irrigation works. Let's get into some design considerations. So in order to understand the irrigation system, I'd like to just kind of run through it and point out some of the most important elements. In the lower left-hand corner, you see your water meter. The water meter is somewhere out at the street, and this is sort of the end of your water provider's responsibility. The water is brought in from your water provider through your water meter, and once it passes through your water meter, you're responsible for it. Even if it's, way out there in the parkway of your, um, next to the sidewalk or next to the street, it is still your responsibility once it passes through that meter. And the water that passes through that meter is under pretty high pressure because think about it, these water providers are having to send water, all over the city to everybody. And so they need a pretty high pressure to get it through all these pipes. And so it comes through there. And the first thing that you often see in an irrigation system is you may see something called pressure regulation, or you may see something called a backflow preventer. Now, if you have a larger property or you're on a hillside or you have a swimming pool, the chances that you have a backflow preventer that looks like the one in this picture uh, are higher. If you don't have any of those things, you're in a flat area, you don't have a very large property, and you don't have a swimming pool or a large water feature, chances are you don't have a backflow preventer. But the backflow preventer is essentially a device that is preventing any water that goes through the valve, so that goes through the backflow preventer onto your property. It keeps it from essentially being sucked back into the main water supply. So it's sort of a master regulation of and it protects the main water supply. So it's like a master regulation of the water on your property. It keeps all the water that comes on your property there. You also may have pressure regulation separate, uh, close to this backflow prevention. You usually have this kind of pressure regulation if the pressure coming into your property is very high. And we're going to show you other ways to do pressure regulation, but a master pressure regulator is something that people see. Okay, now just to remember, any pipes that are carrying water are still pressurized, meaning if for some reason there was a crack in one of those pipes or a hole or they were broken in some way, water would be spurting out at the pressure, unchecked really, at the pressure that it came, onto the property. So these are all high pressure lines that are filled with water all the time, and they are the source of major leaks if there's ever a break. Once the water comes onto your property, it may go into your house first and then come back out to the landscape, or you may have a split where one main line goes into your home and another irrigation main line goes out to the irrigation. Both are totally workable. But once that water, again, still under pressure, comes out into your irrigation system, it is going to then be stopped by a valve. And the valves you can see there in the middle of the picture are the kind of black things that you're seeing there. These are valves that control the irrigation and keep the water from going out into the landscape. So all the high pressure water is sort of stuck behind these valves. When your irrigation controller sends an electrical signal to those valves, each of those valves, and says, go ahead and open for this period of time, the valve will open up and that water that is under pressure will go out and fill what are called lateral lines. The lateral lines are all this white pipe that you see in the landscape, and these lateral lines have sprinklers attached to them, either spray emitters, or in the case of the lower right hand side, you find a drip configuration. Um, when the valve is open, all the lines that are attached to that valve are under pressure, and it's that pressure that pushes the water out of the emitter, whether it's spray or drip. When the valve closes, the pressure in the line decreases, in fact goes away, and so now there's still water in the line, it's just not under pressure. And so as a result, the spray heads go down and the drip emitters stop emitting water. Um, that's pretty much it. And the irrigation controller is what signals your valves to turn on or turn off. So that's pretty much how an irrigation system works. It's pretty straightforward, but as you can see, there are a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that could potentially get messed up. Um, okay, so when you have drip irrigation, you need to reduce the pressure of the water down to 30 psi or below. Now, it could be coming into your property at 90 or higher psi, or out of your house at 70 psi, and it comes into your landscape and into your irrigation system. If it's a drip system, we need to reduce it down to below 30 psi to make it efficient. And the way that we do that would be either adding a master pressure regulator, which we showed you before, sort of at the beginning of the irrigation system before any of the valves, or adding pressure regulation at the valves themselves. And that's what you see here circled with the red. It's showing you that the valve is actually regulating the pressure down to 25 psi. You also want to make sure that if you do not have a backflow preventer, so again, smaller property, maybe not hillside and so forth, you want to make sure that the valves that you are using are anti-siphon valves. So the valves that you see here are sitting 6 inches or higher above the highest emitter in that irrigation zone that they control. And by doing that, they are functioning as backflow prevention for the water that goes into that particular zone. And that's why they sit above grade like this. We want to make sure that these valves are low flow control valves. And this is going to come up again when we talk about whether we can change out from spray to drip. The low flow irrigation valves are essential for drip. And also, the valve itself is going to have the pressure regulation on it, and it's also going to have a filter on it. And the filter is going to make sure that no debris is going to be getting into the drip irrigation line. Now, if you do have a backflow preventer, you might have what is called an inline or a globe valve. And you can see that this is the same kind of valve. It just doesn't need to sit above the grade. It can sit below ground. And the reason it can do that is because you have a backflow preventer on the entire system. So here, the inline valve is usually in a box below ground, and the box has gravel in it, so it's nice and clean and easy to work with. But it's exactly the same really as the anti-siphon valve. It's just, it has the filtration, it has pressure regulation, it's low flow, but it can be installed below grade. The irrigation line itself could be one of two types. The first type is called inline drip irrigation. Inline drip irrigation is essentially a 1/2 inch tube that has the emitters embedded in it at regular intervals. So as you see here, there's an emitter on the left-hand side with the box around it, and there's an emitter over on the right-hand side with a box around it. The distance between these two emitters uh, is standard for the whole line. So you select, do I want my emitters 12 inches apart, 18 inches apart, or 24 inches apart? And it depends on what you're doing with the irrigation as to how far apart you want to select the emitters. We'll talk about that in a second. But it's important to remember that when we talk about, excuse me, when we talk about inline drip irrigation, we are talking about the emitters being embedded inside of the emitter of the tube. This is ideal if you are doing any kind of ground cover or what we call a grid pattern. So you're trying to create a uniform watering for a large area. This landscape that you see here is all grid inline drip irrigated. And it has shrubs and trees, but it also is mostly ground cover. And that's why that grid pattern was suggested, because this creates a uniform watering across all of the landscape. When you install a drip grid, you need to make choices about, first of all, the emitter spacing. So that's how far apart are those emitters going to be. And you also need to make a choice about how far apart the actual tubes are going to be. So there's going to be a relationship between those two things. And then you also need to make a choice about how much water is coming out of each emitter when it runs. And remember, it's in gallons per hour. So the first thing that you see here is the emitter flow rate. The emitter flow rate is the rate at which the water is coming out of each one of those embedded emitters. And if you have sandy soils, you're looking at 1 gallon per hour. If you have a more clayey soil, you're looking at 1/2 gallon per hour for each of the emitters. And if you just think about that, remember what I said about sandy soil, the water goes through it really quickly. It can go into it quickly, but clay soil, it's a lot slower. So that's why you can have a faster emission with the sandy soil than you can with the clay soil. The second thing there is the emitter spacing. So usually if you're doing a grid, you're going to be spacing your emitters 12 or 18 inches apart. If you have sandy soils, you definitely want to use the 12-inch apart. If you have clayey soils, you may want to go with the 18 inches apart. Because remember, clay soils, it all spreads out. Sandy soils, it goes down faster. And then finally, the line spacing. How much space in between the tubes that you're laying on the ground? And again, the line spacing is going to be, it's usually the same as what you have with the emitter spacing. That's a good, default idea. So if you have sandy soils, you want the lines spaced closer together. And if you have clayey soils, they can be spaced further apart, more like 18 inches apart. When the drip grid is laid on the ground, you're actually going to offset the emitters so that there is this pattern that's created. And you can see if each of the emitters is putting out a circle of water, we want to make sure that all of those circles are touching each other. So we're getting this uniform amount of water that's going down on the ground. And so by offsetting the emitters, we get this triangular pattern. And this is something that we think about as we're laying down that grid. So the other kind of drip irrigation that you might want to use is called point source or online drip irrigation. And this is a situation where the half-inch tubing is actually blank. There are no emitters in it. And you go ahead and install the emitters into the tubing where you want them to be, which is usually where your plants are. So it's essentially, as it says, online drip irrigation. You're putting the emitter online, it's not embedded inside. This is perfect if you are trying to irrigate what we call a random pattern. So a random pattern, you see it laid out on the upper left. A random pattern is great when you have plants that are spaced pretty far apart. You know they're going to get large, so you want to give them enough space to grow in. And what the reason that you use the random pattern is because you can target where the water is going to go. So there isn't going to, first of all, you're not doing a grid, so you're not watering everything uniformly. You're just watering the plants that you're installing. And with the random pattern and the online installation, you really can get targeted. You can be putting that water right at the root zone of the plant and not wasting anything in between that could possibly sprout weeds. Now, how many emitters do you put down? Well, it's a good question. In general, we like to have 1 gallon of water uh, per hour coming out on each plant that's a gallon size or smaller. So it's kind of the rule is at least 1 gallon per hour per 1 gallon plant. And remember, plants come in different size containers, right? 4 inches, 1 gallon, 5 gallon, and 15 gallon. So the 1, 5, and 15 gallon is being represented here. And essentially, what we are doing here is we're using half gallon per hour, so a 0.5 gallon per hour emitters, and we're installing them on either side of the plant. This is kind of optimal because then you're wetting the entire root ball of the plant, and it's not, it's not going to have some tendency to try to, lean into, any one source of water. It's really getting water on its whole root ball. Where and so for a 1 gallon plant, you're going to install 2 emitters. For a 5 gallon plant, you'll do 4 emitters. 15 gallon plant, 6 emitters. And really, it depends on the type of soil that you have. It depends on whether or not you have a slope. It depends on the root depth of the plant. The bigger the plant, the more emitters you're going to want to have spread all around the root ball of the plant. Now, I keep saying spread on the root ball, and what does that really mean? Well, look at the picture on the right-hand side, the little drawing that we have here. If the trunk of the plant is indicated in the middle of the circle, we want to make sure that our emitters are not right up against that trunk of the plant. And we also don't want them outside of the root ball, which is indicated by the circle itself. So If the emitters were outside the root ball, the plant wouldn't be getting any water on it and it would be very unhappy. We want to make sure that when we install the plant, the emitters are halfway between the trunk of the plant and the edge of the root ball. That is the perfect place for the drip emitter to go. Uh, you will hear people say, oh, we put the emitters outside the root ball because we want the roots to grow out. No, it doesn't work that way. The water moves through the soil, the plant accesses it through the soil, but we want to make sure, especially when we're planting, that the root ball is staying wet when it gets irrigated. That's the most important thing, is for the plant to develop a really strong root system. So uh, this is an important little thing to keep in mind. Not on the woody trunk or the trunk of the plant, and not outside the root ball, halfway between. Okay, now if we're going to install this stuff, how do we do it properly? Well, the first thing that we want to think about is something called the point of connection. The point of connection is where your lateral line, which is that PVC pipe that's running through your landscape, and when the valve turns on, the water goes through those PVC pipes out to the drip line. And the point of connection is where the drip line is actually tapping into that lateral line. So you can see here that the lateral lines are going to be installed deeper in the soil than your drip tubing. The lateral line is going to be, 12 inches is optimal. I mean, a lot of times you see them just installed way too shallow, like 4 inches. This is not good installation. It needs to be 8, 10, 12 is the best. So 12 inches deep is where the lateral line should be, so that it doesn't get broken. It doesn't get, if somebody accidentally drives over that area or puts something heavy on it, it doesn't crack the pipe, right? It needs to be down deep. Anyway, so that lateral line is down there. Then attached to the lateral line is a riser. And the riser is a PVC pipe that is bringing that water up to the surface so that the drip tubing can be installed into a T that or an elbow that allows you to convert the PVC pipe to drip tubing. And thinking about where your point of connections are is pretty important. We want to make sure that at each point of connection, it's done very well when it's installed, so it's glued properly and everything is installed properly. And we also want to make sure that we think about good places for these points of connection to be. So I'm just going to say, I like to have my points of connection fairly close to where my valves are if I can, or fairly close to um, a place in the landscape that I'm always going to know, okay, there's a point of connection there. And I'm going to show you another little thing to add in here. But the points of connection are places where things go wrong over time. And so you kind of want to know where they are. So thinking about, before it's installed, thinking about what's a logical place for these things to be is really good. When you are actually installing the drip irrigation tubing, you want to make sure that you're giving yourself some slack. I can't tell you how many times I see people, and this is with grid or with random pattern, but especially with random pattern, people who stretch the tubing because they think they're going to be saving a little bit of, money, maybe not have to buy more tubing, but they stretch it out and try to make as many plants as possible in one line and have no slack. Well, the problem with that is when the plants grow and you need to move things around, you're sunk because you don't have that slack. So give yourself some slack. Hey, I mean, that's a good idea anyway. Give yourself some slack. The next thing is that when it's being installed, when drip tubing is being installed, and here you see a random pattern, the emitters need to be on the uphill side of the plant. So you can see all of these plants have emitters. This is inline irrigation in a random pattern. And you can see the emitters on the uphill side of the plant. Now, why is that? Well, because water runs downhill. And if you put the emitter below the plant, it's not going to do anything but run off. So make sure it's on top and is actually, halfway between the woody stem and the edge of the root ball. Trees are going to need some special attention. We want to make sure that we are not right on the trunk of the tree and that we've also created some concentric circles so that we can expand the size of our irrigation as the tree grows. We can eliminate some of these circles potentially, and we can add on to them to make more circles. If we are removing turf and we have an existing tree, especially, but this really kind of works even if you're planting a large tree. But this is a specific case of you have an existing tree, you're taking out the grass, now you want to put down drip irrigation for the tree. What do? Well, remember, we want to have these concentric circles around the tree. So we're irrigating the entire root ball of the tree. Now, in a situation like this where we have a large tree, there are a couple things to remember. First of all, these circles are not up against the trunk of the tree. As you can see here, we're starting 12 to 24 inches away. That's where the first circle ends up being. And we're essentially putting circles together that go all the way out to what's called the drip line of the tree. The drip line of the tree is the edge of the canopy of the tree. The idea is that you want to have a pattern there. So this is sort of like a grid pattern, but in a circle. We want to have a pattern that when it's turned on, at least 50% of that soil surface under the tree is wet. So you can see it, you can test it by turning it on, putting water through it and seeing, okay, am I achieving this 50% wetting under the tree? And I actually recommend also that you don't stop at the drip line if you're doing this. You actually go out another 1 or 2 circles beyond the drip line because that tree is probably going to be continuing to grow. And your roots of a mature tree like this are all the way out into the landscape and they are accustomed to getting grass water. So they're accustomed to getting good water. You want to irrigate as many of those roots as possible with the drip system so that it doesn't go into shock. When you are installing this tubing, you need to use staples to hold the tubing down on the ground. And people will try to use what are called square staples. They're like, yeah, they're square. And that is, that's used for fabric and stuff like that, which we don't use anyway, but that is not the right thing. You want to have a U-shaped staple so that it can go in and it doesn't kink the tubing itself. And you're going to use a staple every 3 to 5 feet. These are very, very cheap. They come in, 500 in a box. You use them more is better than fewer because it gives you more control. And especially if you have a lot of slack in the line, this allows it to all stay down on the ground so that when you put the mulch on, it doesn't pop up and move around. Again, your emitter placement is going to be halfway between the plant itself, the root collar, and the edge of the root ball. And it's important to know also that if you're planting new, that root ball may not be the entire size of the can that it came in. It's possible that you have a smaller root ball. So you really want to see when you're planting, how big is the root ball of this particular plant? And that's where you're going to place the emitter. The pointy end of an online emitter goes into the tube. And the round part goes out. You'd be surprised how many people try to put the pointy end sticking out. And the emitter, when you're placing it, is actually parallel to the soil. So it's not pointing up is the point. It's pointing sideways toward the plant. And, if anything, pointing down a little bit, but sideways toward the plant. And then once you have your irrigation installed, whether it's a grid or a random pattern, whether it's inline or it's online, once it's installed and you've taken a picture of it without the mulch on top so that you can see where everything is, then you cover up the drip line with 3 to 4 inches of mulch. So the drip line goes on the ground and the mulch goes on top of it. At the end of each run of irrigation, you are going to install something that we call a tattletale. And the tattletale is essentially this little device that when the irrigation gets turned on for that zone, it pops up. It doesn't emit any water, but it pops up and it tells you, okay, there's pressure in the whole line. All of these emitters should be working. Nothing has popped out, because if an emitter is popped off or something is blocked up and not working, that tattletale will not come up all the way. So this is telling you, hey, it's on. It also this is a good place to either put the point of connection near where the tattletale is, or it's a good place to put what's called your flush valve or your clean out valve. Now remember, drip tubing, whether it has the emitters stuck in it or the emitters are already embedded, this is a 1/2 inch tube, and all kinds of debris could end up coming into this line. It's not coming so much. It's not coming from the water system, as it's little bits that are kind of getting sucked into the emitters and so forth. And even during installation, stuff gets into it. So you are going to want to flush out these lines on a pretty regular basis so that you're keeping everything in really good working order. In the first year or so, you're probably going to flush once a month or once a quarter, and then after that, you get down to a couple times a year. But in order to flush, you want to have a end that is easy to open and allow the water to rush out. And so what you're seeing here are 2 different manual flush installations. One is called a figure 8. That's the one on the left. And the other one is a little valve. They're both great for use. We recommend manual flushes instead of an automatic flush. I pretty much guarantee you that a contractor is going to try to sell you an automatic flush. And that's a device that flushes every single time you turn on the irrigation. The problem with that is you're wasting water. Like, why would you do that? You don't need to flush every time you turn on the irrigation. You just need to flush as part of your maintenance. Something to avoid, I'm going to start with the left, no spaghetti tubing. So even though we have a situation where the inline um, emitters, where we're popping them into the tubing itself, we do not want to be using the spaghetti tubing, because every single place, so not just where it attaches to the 1/2 inch tube, but also all these little emitter dials and all this little sticks and all this stuff, these are all places that this thing can break. And I am telling you, they break like nonstop. The only time to use spaghetti tubing is if you have a planter, let's say, or a container that you're trying to get the water to. But in the landscape, absolutely avoid using this 1/4 inch tubing. Be careful on the upper right of having your emitters too far away from the plants. They need to be on top of the plant. I mean, I can't even tell where this plant is. You can sort of see where the woody plant is. That emitter is way too far away. And by the way, it's facing up, right? It's not even pointed toward the plant. So there's a lot wrong in that picture. And on the bottom, this this tubing doesn't even touch the ground. Like, what's that about? That's not drip tubing. Okay, how do we convert from spray to drip? Does it actually work? Do these kits work? Well, it depends. There are a couple things to consider. The first is, what is the age of your existing system? If you have a system really that is any more than a few years old, and I would say 5 is kind of the outside age, um, you really are going to be considering doing a big renovation to the irrigation system. If it looks anything like this, it absolutely has to be completely replaced, all of this stuff. Um, and so I think that that's a a realization that isn't often talked about because drip conversion kits are given out and they're great. But if your existing irrigation system is not going to be operating as efficiently as this drip conversion is, what often happens is hairline fractures, all kinds of issues that you really didn't see before when it was spraying and everything was under high pressure. The minute there's a pressure differential and you've got this really low pressure happening, those breaks are exacerbated. We often find the valves breaking down, the lateral lines cracking, the risers cracking, all this stuff. So yeah, 5 years. The other thing is most of us don't have low flow irrigation valves. If you have a spray valve, uh, like these brass valves on the left or the plastic valves on the right, that are running your spray system, that's perfectly fine at 50, 60 psi, which is running your spray irrigation. But now you're going to be down below 30 psi and you need a low flow valve. And the reason you need a low flow valve is because the diaphragm on the valve, the diaphragm moves up and down depending on whether the valve is open or closed. And when there's a very, very low pressure going over the diaphragm sometimes doesn't um, realize, that the irrigation is on. It's like it's not pressing the diaphragm at all. And so as a result, the valve sticks open. And the irrigation can run for days, and you don't even know that it's running because it's running at this really low flow. So even though the valve has been told to turn off, it doesn't sense. And so that's why we change out the entire valve and we make sure that it's a low flow valve so that it can sense that low flow. When you have lateral lines in the ground, again, if it's much older than 5 years, you're really kind of playing with fire because these pipes do degrade, and they get these hairline cracks, and you could end up having a break in a lateral line that you didn't even know you had once you change out for this low pressure. Your spray bodies need to be the modern um, plastic spray bodies, the champion heads, and the orbit heads that you see here, these metal heads, they are not going to be able to be converted. Okay, now let's talk about the timer, because honestly, running your irrigation controller is kind of the most is where we waste the most water, quite honestly. So how do we determine the irrigation schedule to begin with? Well, really, it comes down to understanding when you need to add water. With our gas tanks, we know, okay, some of us are a little bit more nervous than others. And so when it gets to halfway empty, we fill it up again. And that's perfectly legitimate. Others are able to live with the stress. They go almost to zero before they fill up again. And really, uh, it depends on the type of plants. It depends on our landscape, on our soils. But the timing is actually mostly dependent on how quickly that particular plant or group of plants are taking water out of the soil. If we have one of those plants, remember the chart in the beginning, one of those plants that is taking water out fast and needs a lot of it, those plants are going to be irrigated more frequently because they're removing greater amounts faster from the soil. So remember that each day when the sun comes out, the plant is actually taking a little bit more water out of the soil to cool itself down and use as air conditioning. And the number of days that it takes for the plant to remove half of the water from the soil is essentially when we want to start getting water back into the soil through irrigation. Now, the actual timing of when that half of the water is gone is dependent on the type of soil that we have. Half of the water is going to be gone a lot faster in sandy soil because sandy soil doesn't hold on to very much water. But when we have clayey soils, they are going to be holding on to more water. And so half of the water is going to be gone on a slower time frame than with the sandy soil. It also depends, of course, on the type of plant that you're watering. If you're watering a tree that has really deep roots, it's going to have access to a lot more water. It isn't going to need to be irrigated as frequently. If you are looking at a perennial plant that is well established, it might be woody. It might not need as much water, or it might be tender, and so it's in need of more water to keep those tender leaves and so forth nice and cool. If you have cool season grass, we know already it needs water. It needs it frequently. Its roots are really short. It's only got like 3 or 4 inch root depth. And so it doesn't have access to much water. And on top of it, it needs a lot. Or you might have a shrub that is, got a 2 foot root depth or a 3 foot root depth, and it is adapted to the climate. It's happy. It's not taking a lot of water out and it has deeper roots. It's not going to need as much water and it's not going to need it as frequently. So the type of plants that you're irrigating really have an impact on the timer. Whether you have a slope or not and how steep that slope is something that you're going to want to know for your timer. Of course, are you in the sun or the shade? If you're in the sun, your plants are evapotranspiring at a different rate than they are when they're in the shade and they're cooler. You can actually research a watering calculator, and there may be others. This is just an example of one. There may be others in your particular region that you can use to get in the ballpark, to just get an idea, like how many minutes should I be running my irrigation controller for, given all of these conditions that I just talked about: the soil, the plants, the slope, the sun or shade, and the type of irrigation that you have. And you put this data into these watering calculators. And believe me, there are many of these watering calculators. You put the data in, and it will spit out, given any particular month, the number of minutes per week that you need to run the controller for. And that information is going to help you to program the actual controller. Whatever information you come up with, you want to make sure you write it down and you have it at your timer. The other thing that you want to have at your irrigation controller is an actual map of your landscape. So making just a very rough site map like this and marking on it where your irrigation valves are located, and then the type of irrigation that you have and which sprinklers or zones are going on at the same time. So in this particular case, we have 2 different irrigation zones. It's all spray right now. We haven't converted anything yet. We have 2 valves. We're using color in order to differentiate between the 2 zones, but it helps us to keep a map of this at our timer so that when we are making our program, we're actually able to reference back and say, okay, oh yes, the front yard, main front yard is zone number 1, and it has this program on it. Zone number 2 are the 2 little strips along the driveway, and it has a different program on it. So if we're actually going to program our irrigation timer, I think we should start simply and just start with 1 station and 1 zone. So this is a situation where there's just one, it's a small landscape, there's 1 zone, and we have our irrigation controller. We're going to go through now the step by step to actually program this, and you're going to see it's doable. So here's a sample zone. This is low water use shrubs, so they're adapted to the climate. It's a drip irrigation system. It's clay loam soil, and it's a part sun situation. So let's first understand what all these different things do. The most important thing, I think, is the controller on or off. Make sure it's on. And then I'm going to go over here to the right-hand side and kind of run down the list. If the dial isn't turned to run, it's not running. So it needs to be turned to run. The buttons that we are going to use are these buttons on the upper right-hand side, the plus and minus and the left and right arrows. The program selection is going to allow us to select which particular program, and every single controller has something like this. Especially if it's a manual controller like this, it's going to have a way to set the date and time, the start time. That's when you want to start your irrigation in a particular day. The run time. How long is the irrigation going to be running for on each of the valves? Water days. What day of the week are we going to be actually running this particular program? And then some of them have rain sensors. Some of them allow you to run the irrigation manually. And some of them have this thing called seasonal adjustment, which I'll show you in a second. But we're really going to start with the buttons on the right. So first, make sure you have the date and time correct. And the way that you move through the different prompts, and most of these controllers actually prompt you in the box. You move through them by toggling with the left and right um, arrows and then adding time or adding, saying yes or no with the plus and minuses. So you use the arrows to toggle through the prompt that says what year is it, what month is it, day, and time. And then you use those plus and minus buttons to change it. I mean, this is a lot like setting the time on your car, just saying. Um, so once you have the correct time and date, you want to go ahead and set an irrigation start time. And for most of us, we're going to recommend that that be very early morning, late in the evening or early morning. 6 p.m. is a great time. 5 p.m. is also, a pretty good time. Um, so sometime from like in the evening to the early morning. That is the window that we want to have you irrigating. There are a lot of great reasons to be irrigating at night, mostly because the water demand isn't as great then, and so it's a good time to be irrigating. And when you set your irrigation start, uh, you're setting like one time of the day that all the irrigation is going to run. Now, we're just doing one zone right now, but if we had multiple zones, the first zone would start at the time we set, and then the next zone would start when that first one was done, and so forth. They would run sequentially. So after we set a start time, we want to figure out the run time. That's how long is the irrigation going to run in minutes. And we again toggle with the plus and minus. Once we turn the dial to run time, we add or subtract minutes using the plus and minus buttons. Now we want to check the watering days, so we turn the dial to watering days, and we are going to use the arrow to move through the days of the week. So I use the arrow Monday. Do I want to do it Monday? If I do, plus. If I don't, then I minus. If I want to do Tuesday, instead, I plus Tuesday, and then I don't plus anything else in the week, and so forth. So the pluses add days, the minus eliminates days. And once you've done those four things, you turn that dial back to run, and you're done. And your irrigation will run at that start time for that amount of time on the days of the week that you indicated. That's pretty easy, actually. Now, what happens if you have multiple zones? Like in this case, we have a lawn and we have a native garden that is drip irrigation. The lawn is like a spray. Well, each valve is going to need its own schedule. So now we have to actually create a program. And when we make a program, we're essentially looking at the controller as though it has like two mini timers or however many programs, in this case two mini controllers. So we're basically going to do the same thing that we did for one timer or for one program, but we're now going to do it for two separate programs. And we really need to think of them as being completely independent, because program A could run on some set of days for some amount of time, and it's totally independent from when program B runs. Program B is going to run on another set of days for a different amount of time. And this essentially allows us to group together zones in the landscape that have a similar irrigation type or a similar plant type, and run the sprinklers or the drip irrigation in that particular zone, all on the same program. So let's start with program A. If we need two different start times, and so we select program A with the program button, and then we turn the dial to start time, and we enter a start time, going back and forth with the plus and minus. Once we've done that, we are going to actually click the program button again, and we come up with program B, and we set a new start time. So the dial's been turned to start time for both of them. We set both of the start times at this outset. We want to make sure that the programs don't overlap. And what we mean by that is if program A is going to start at 3 o'clock in the morning and is going to run for um, is going to run for 2 hours basically. Well, we can't start the next program until 5 o'clock in the morning, because if we tried to start something sooner than that, it would be confused because it's running program A from 3 to 5. So program A is going to start at 3 and program B is going to start at 5 a.m. You have to do a little work here. Take a piece of paper and kind of write it down how you're going to do it so that you don't have the overlap, but you can do it. Now, program A is drip irrigation. So we're going to enter a zone, and we enter the zone number 1 runtime by toggling through with the arrows to come up with zone number 1. And then, oh, I'm sorry, the one thing we have to do is turn that dial to runtime to set the runtime. That's important. We toggle with the arrow to get to the zone number 1, and then we use plus or minus for the amount of time. We actually then put the number of days in, just like we did before. And then we go back and we select program B, and we do the runtime for program B and the number of days for program B. And then once we're done, turn it to run, and this will run different days of the week, different run times for the two different zones in the landscape. Now, something to remember is that in the summer, your irrigation schedule is going to be different than it's going to be in the wintertime. We want to actually set our irrigation controller manually for the highest watering day or the highest watering month, the month that we need the most. And then we can adjust it in the months when we're not going to need as much. And mostly that's when the days are shorter. So in the spring and in the fall, we don't need as much water, certainly not in the winter. So we use this thing called seasonal adjust in order to take our program that we put in there and then not have to mess with it. And all we're doing by using seasonal adjust is we're saying, okay, in this particular time, we're only going to run 50%, right? That's going to be spring and fall. And then in the winter, we're going to be at 10%, let's say, or even 0. And so this way we have a program that we don't have to worry about, and we can adjust it for the times of the year when we don't need as much water. Now, in all these things, it's really better to be using a smart irrigation controller. A smart irrigation controller is a controller that is using weather data and conditions on the site that you put into the controller, and it's calculating itself the runtime, the days of the week. It makes it a lot easier than having to do all that manual work. It takes really the guesswork out of the runtime in particular, and it will shut off during a rainstorm, which is really important. It manually adjusts in the winter months and so forth, and it actually cycles and soaks as well, which means it will watch for runoff. So you can program it to say, I can only run this for 10 minutes at any time, and it'll run it for 10 minutes and then let it soak for a little bit. It does it automatically. So what we're going to do is we're going to look for this water sense label on the irrigation controllers that we get, because we know that they're smart when they have that water sense label, and we know they're going to save us water. Some of these controllers use a mini weather station, which is like this. It sits out in the landscape on a post, and it collects data about the weather in the garden, and then it adjusts the controller accordingly. Others use satellites. And many of them now can be programmed from anywhere, and they show up on your phone. It's really simple. When you have one that you program on your phone, you essentially enter your address and that downloads the climate information for your particular area from the satellite. You are going to set up your zones kind of the same way you think about all the different zones on your landscape where the irrigation is. And then you start to put in information. And this is about your garden. So, what type of plants are in that zone? What type of irrigation is there? What is the soil type? Then you can also set things like if there are any parameters for watering. Hey, I only want to water during the week, or I only want to water on specific days, or every, once a week. All of that is flexible and you can set all of that on these controllers. There's a manual for every single irrigation controller, whether it's smart or not, and you can download those all from the web. And many of these apps are readily available for download. And of course, there are a zillion YouTube videos on how to do all of this. All right, finally, let's wrap up with a little maintenance. Quarterly, you should turn your system on and make sure it's working. That's especially in the first couple of years. Get a soil probe. You should have one of those for your landscape anyway, and it's really the best way to know whether you have your irrigation correctly, you're irrigating correctly. A soil moisture sensor, even one as simple as this that you can get at, really any hardware store is great because it can tell you whether or not there's water in the soil. And remember that beneath the surface, it could be dry. So you really need to go down there beneath the surface. This is indicated in this picture perfectly. Top was wet, but below, bone dry. Now, make sure that you are thinking about, uh, and even if your program, even if a contractor programs your controller, like think about some basic things. You're going to be watering more frequently if it's a brand new landscape, right? The roots are shallow. The plants came in potting soil. It's not even good soil. You're going to be watering more frequently. You might even be watering for a slightly longer run time. And over time, you're going to be able to cut that back, both the frequency and the run time, because established plants have deeper roots. They're already now in the native soil, so they don't need that extra water. And so the frequency can decrease, and eventually, you could turn off, especially if they're climate adapted, the irrigation if we are getting winter rain. If you see something like this happening, it could be anything. I mean, it could be a gopher, it could be a shovel. More likely a shovel, really, than a gopher, but it could be either. Something's punctured the tubing. And as I said before, you cannot tell from looking above ground whether the soil is too wet or too dry. You need a soil probe. The soil probe will tell you which way it is because the plant looks exactly the same from above the ground. Have some extra stuff on hand in order to fix your leaks. Goof plugs and a drip repair cup, a couple extra couplings and some extra tubing even. Have it on hand so that you can fix it quickly. These filters that are on the valves are really important and they should be cleaned out twice a year. Super easy to do. You grab them out. You don't throw them away. You just rinse them and then you put them back in. Good to go. Those flush valves that we showed, the figure 8 and so forth, you want to do that quarterly too, especially in the beginning. Over time, it can be less frequent, but try to design the system so the water's going in the landscape and not out of it. And always keep your drip tubing covered by mulch. If you're in doubt, hire a professional. The EPA.gov WaterSense, you're going to get the link, has a list of professionals. Now, good news, there are turf removal program rebates in Los Angeles and Ventura, $2 a square foot. And it while resources last, you're going to get the links to this. Thanks for the evaluation, Marianne. Also, if you are in the San Diego area, it's $1.50 a square foot, up to 750 square feet. And if you're a commercial site, up to 2,500 square feet. Is this Sonoma? I can't tell now. There's so much stuff on my screen. Yes, Sacramento area. The Sacramento area, it's $2 a square foot for turf removal. And in the Sonoma area, it's $1 a square foot. for turf removal. So there's a lot of money out there to actually replace your grass with a landscape. But there are also rebates for smart controllers. And I highly recommend you get one of those. And a lot of other outdoor devices, irrigation, and even rain barrels and things like that. So we'd love your feedback. Please put it on the evaluation. I know I ran a little bit over time. It's a long class, lots to share. And with that, I will stop sharing and maybe answer a question or two if you had any.
There were a lot of questions.
Yeah, oh, good.
Yeah, it was great. I'm so glad because this is really how you get to take advantage of these classes. I think one question that got asked that we don't really talk about in the class is what do you do? A little bit more information about how do you work with a a garden that you're not going to take all the plants out. Like everything that we talk about is you can lay fresh pipe and you can do all this. But what do you do if you've got a garden that's full of plants and you want to be able to switch over to drip?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the best thing is you're going to abandon the lateral lines in your landscape. So the spray irrigation lateral lines, you're going to abandon them. They're just going to leave them there. And you go back. So you're going to replace your valves and you're going to turn them into drip irrigation valves, the low flow valves. And then you are going to run new PVC pipe just a couple of feet from that valve. So you just have to get out into the landscaped area with the PVC pipe. So you're not running it all around, just out to there. And then from there, you do drip tubing and you snake it. You're probably not going to be using a grid pattern for that. You'll be using the random pattern and recommend doing the inline, so the point source, especially if it's an established garden. And you run the blank tubing around the landscape and around the plants, just as we talked about, and then put the emitters in. You still do a end, the end figure eight. You put a tattletale on the end of it, and you have essentially installed drip irrigation on the landscape with the existing plants. You cover everything with 4 inches of mulch, and you're good to go. But the key is you have to get your head around the fact that you're just going to abandon the old stuff. You can even leave the spray heads right where they are, or you can remove them after you've, cut it all off and put the new valves in.
Very good.
Yeah.
So I think maybe there was a question that either Victoria or Wendy, if you'd like to speak to it. So there seemed to be questions about actually tracking water usage and the controller versus actually having a water monitor. And then what sorts of rebates resources are available for your customers? You'd like to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I can talk about that. Your smart controllers, those are your irrigation controllers. They're not going to track your water usage. What you are referring to is flow monitoring devices. There's a number of different flow monitoring devices out there. The most inexpensive one, which is one that you as a consumer can put on manually, it attaches to the side of your meter and it doesn't have to be plumbed in. You don't have to call a plumber. It is very easy to install, and it will monitor your flow. It will give you leak detection if something goes wrong, and all of them have a learning as it goes along, machine learning, to be able to disseminate after a period of time between your indoor usage and your outdoor usage. And they will give you reports. They'll send you to an email, and they have an app that you utilize. That the app will tell you if you have a leak. The ones that are plumbed in, they have auto shutoffs. So if it sends you a leak alert, it'll send you on your phone a leak alert. You have a leak, and you have the ability to say, okay, shut my water off. And it will actually shut you off if you're out of town, if you're, just at work and you're not going to be there for a few hours. It allows you to shut off the water remotely from using the app in your phone. Those are a bit more expensive. I know LA and Ventura District, we do have rebates on all of those for $100 rebates. on those. I don't think at present, Victoria, remind me if I'm wrong. At present, we don't have anything up north, but we have in the past, and we might start back up maybe after the first of the year. We might look into doing that again. So sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that's great.
No,
Yeah,
no, but understanding the difference between the controller and the meter, and it's not the same thing.
Not the same.
So,
yeah, the
No.
controller is just turning on or turning off your valve. That's all the controller's doing.
Yeah, controls your irrigation.
It
Yeah.
controls the timing. Yeah, it controls your irrigation. Yep. Well,
right.
one more, or is that pretty much it?
There were others. I just know we're running a little bit over. Let's see if there
I
was.
mean, it was something that was like everyone was asking.
Uh, yeah, so there was a question that sort of kept coming up in different ways. Um, and the idea that you talk about the backflow prevention, and some folks were going, is it actually better to have a pressure regulator versus the anti-siphon valves? And my feeling was, if you don't have to go that route, it's better to go with the anti-siphon valves. But if you want to go ahead and just explain why you would choose one over the other, that might be helpful.
Well, the most important consideration is to know that when you do a backflow preventer, like a full-on device that is a master backflow preventer, it needs to be inspected. I think it's once a year.
Yeah.
And so, and it's
Yeah.
installed by a plumber. And so, and they are certified to install it. So that is something that a professional is going to do. But I'm telling you, if you have a large property and if you have a hillside property or you have a pool, something like that, you definitely just want to install that and go for it. It's just that's part of your plumbing of your outdoor water use. Um, if you have a smaller property, using the anti-siphon valves are perfectly fine. There are two things to consider. One is really important and one is aesthetic. The really important one is anti-siphon valves need, first of all, many of our pictures of the anti-siphon valves had white pipe above ground. No, that is absolutely wrong. It needs to be black pipe above ground. That is something you can tell right away if someone's installing the white pipe. No. It needs to be 6 inches above the highest emitter in the zone in order to work. So if you have a hillside and there's an emitter up there on the hillside, and then you have your anti-siphon valves down at the house, that's not working, because those anti-siphon valves have to be like 20 feet tall, right? To get to the top of the higher than the hillside. So that's a big consideration, and people don't usually take that into account. So if you're going to do anti-siphon valves, do them right. The other thing is an aesthetic thing. I can't tell you how many very lovely high-end homes I've walked into where, because the homeowners either didn't know or didn't express an option or didn't express an opinion with the contractors or gardeners that installed it, they have these giant anti-siphon valves at their front doors. it's I mean, I'm sorry, but as someone who buys and sells real estate, I mean, talk about curb appeal. So yeah, have them placed someplace that makes, that's out of eyesight. If they're going to be sticking above ground, and some of them might be 18 inches above ground, have them out of sight and have them be, design them so that they're obscured from view and so forth. And that takes planning and that takes some design. So you need to do that and think about it and express it to the contractor, or you want to make sure that your designer or contractor is thinking about that when they're installing it. So those are my 2 thoughts. All right, probably too much TMI.
No, not at all. I was answering a question while you were talking. So that is great. People are saying, well, how can they ask more questions? And we say the best way to ask more questions is come to other classes.
Exactly.
Then you've got an expert behind the scenes available to answer all of your questions. So yeah, plus you get to learn more, another benefit.
Exactly. And when is the next class? I want to
Uh,
ask.
I believe it's in, uh,
November.
no, we have another one coming up
Oh, no, we have
a
rainwater
week and a
harvesting
half.
on the
On a
28th.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Oh, no. When is it?
It's the weed management.
Oh, weed management, right.
Yeah.
It's just like
It's
next
like
week, right?
next week, a
Oh, my
week and 2
goodness.
days.
Fantastic. That's
Yeah,
great.
so that's coming up, and then we have one in November as well. So,
Right.
um,
So weed and pest management. If you, I know you have questions about gophers. So
yeah.
that's the class to come to. Okay.
Right.
Thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Got a lot of things to do on a Thursday night, so we're really grateful that you could join us. Thanks for your questions. Everybody learns from them, myself included. And we look forward to seeing you at Weeds and Pests or online to watch the previous classes. So
Yeah.
thank you again, California American Water. Have a great evening.